Good morning, everyone. Is this working okay? I think so, yeah. I'm not in the bulletin. It's a long story there, but this isn't a last-minute thing. Edgar asked me in March, so you don't need to worry about that. And I forgot to ask Georgia to play for me, so it's a little bit of a one-man show, but, we'll work through it. Let's have a prayer. Dear Father, we thank you for being with us today, and we ask that the value of your word will shine through from it. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to go to 2 Kings 5 and look at a little story there. It's a really nice little tidy, self-contained story in the ministry of Elisha the prophet. And you just need to go to the first verse of 2 Kings 5, where it says, "Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. And he was a mighty man of valor, but a leper." And that sets the stage for the whole story. Let me give you some background on Syria and Israel at this time. There are two separate kingdoms, and Syria was a little more powerful than Israel, but they did not really go to war at that time. And what happened is Syria would send in little raiding parties into Israel, 1 month out of the year, 2 months out of the year, under some kind of a pretext. They would always look for some reason to invade Israel and take some of their stuff. So if you're going to make an analogy to that, you kind of imagine, what if Canada was a little more powerful than us, and every once in a while they said, "You're stealing our maple syrup," or something like that. And then they sent their military down here, and they took some of our stuff. So this is the situation that Israel and Syria are in now, which will explain some of the things that happen later in the story. The Syrians, in verse 2, they had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. So when you look at this servant girl's background, on one of these raids, she had been taken captive, which means that she would likely never see her family again. And yet she found herself in this strange position, ministering to the wife of one of the greatest Syrian generals. She was old enough, as you could see later in the story, to know a lot about her own religion, is the Hebrew religion, and to know who Elisha was. So she definitely knew what was happening to her. But because of her character, she actually decided to help Naaman, who had taken her captive. At verse 3, you read, she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, the Israelite prophet, for he would heal him of his leprosy." And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel." So, against all odds, the girl has decided to help Naaman. I don't know if many of us could say the same if we were in that situation. This is a heathen general who has taken her captive. She has every reason to dislike him, even to hate him. And yet, she decides that she's going to tell him about an Israelite who can actually cure this sickness that is making his life miserable. So Naaman thinks this is pretty good news, and he goes to the king of Syria. If you read onward, the king of Syria said, "Go now, Let's go back to verse 4. Naaman went in and told his master, the king, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel." And then the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman departed, and he took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Now I looked up some of the weights of these talents and shekels to figure out exactly what kind of a gift this was. 10 talents of silver is roughly 700 pounds of silver. And when you translate that to the current price of silver, that's about $250,000. The gold is a little bit of a different story. Now, 6,000 shekels of gold is only about 150 pounds. But that 150 pounds of gold is worth $3.5 million in current money. So this was quite a huge sum that Naaman took to Israel. He went to the king of Israel, and he delivered this letter. And when you read this letter, you see that there is a bit of a miscommunication between Naaman and his king, because the letter read this: "Now be advised, when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy." That you may heal him of his leprosy? It's not exactly a prophet. And it happened when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes, and he said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy?" It's a pretty reasonable question in those circumstances. "Therefore, please consider, see how he seeks a quarrel with me." Because this is what the king had in mind. Syria would always seek an excuse in order to launch a raid against Israel. And this was a perfect chance for one of those. If the king of Syria sent over this impossible request and Israel cannot fulfill it, then that would be taken as an offense. And the Syrians would have the excuse to launch another raid. But in this case, the request was actually genuine, although the king didn't know it and he didn't understand. And so, in some ways, he acts like us many a time when we forget that God can actually help us. If we tackle our challenges ourselves, most of the time we'll come out on top. But there are just a few of them that are a little bit too big to handle by yourself. Maybe you'll get there, but it won't work out the way that you wanted or the way that is best for you. You really do need God, and this was one of those situations. So you read in verse 8, Elisha, the man of God, steps in. He heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." So this is good news for Naaman. I'm sure when the king tore his clothes in front of him, he wasn't feeling too confident, but here comes the prophet of God intervening. So Naaman went to Elisha's house with all his horses and all his gifts. And here we have the crux of the story. He stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean." So, first of all, Elisha is from the weaker kingdom. And this great general has come to him from Syria, and he's not even going to meet him at the door. It's already a huge insult to a person of Naaman's stature. So that already puts him on edge. And then he tells him he's got to do something in order to receive the cure for leprosy. Well, that's another insult. And on top of that, asking him to do something, he's also asking him to wash in the river Jordan, which is an Israelite river. Not any of the rivers of Syria, but the Israelite river, which would place him essentially under submission to Israel and their customs. So there's 3 insults that Elisha has given to Naaman at this point, and he's really not having it. Naaman became furious. He went away and said, "Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy." Okay. Then in verse 12, he launches the other objection. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? And he turned away and went in a rage. So then his servants came to him and spoke to him. And they bring out another dimension of Naaman that we don't see in those previous 2 statements that he made. His servants came and spoke to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it?" Which is a very revealing statement. Because if you look at the symbolism of what Elisha asked Naaman to do, he asked him to go in the midst of waters and to immerse himself. Does that sound familiar to you? Not only that, but 7 times. 7 is the perfect number. What Elisha asked Naaman to do actually prefigures baptism. You go in the water, you immerse yourself under the water, and then your flesh shall be clean. Isn't that what we do in a way when we go into the baptismal tank? Now, in Naaman's case, it was leprosy, which is a life-threatening disease for him. Of course, in the case of baptism, it's something deeper. This is cleansing ourselves of sin. But as you can see later in the story, those 2 things are linked for Naaman. And he objects to all of this. First of all, he treats the situation kind of like a transaction. Like, here's my 250,000 of silver, here's 3.5 million in gold and 10 changes of clothes, and I'm bringing you this so you could just come out to the door and, do your little, Hebrew magic, and then my leprosy will be gone. So that's one thing. Then the second thing is that he doesn't want to obey Elisha. These are pretty simple commands. I mean, if you go into a river and you just wade in and you dunk yourself in the water 7 times, anyone can do that. But Naaman thinks this is pretty silly, so he doesn't want to obey. The third thing is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of this whole story. His servants suggest to Naaman that if Elisha had ordered him, instead of dunking himself in the river 7 times, if Elisha had ordered him to go out and, let's say, slay a man-eating lion, or climb a mountain that's never been climbed before, or do some other great and legendary act that Naaman would have gladly accepted, even though that would be much harder physically for him to do. And what that tells me is that Naaman believed that that would be an appropriate way to earn his cure for leprosy. I'm going to do this great thing, and in return, you could cure my disease. When we think of it this way, isn't that like the belief that you have to earn your salvation by doing something good. If you put up enough good things in your ledger, you can balance out the bad things that you've done, and the positive nature of those good acts will give you salvation because you're a good person and you kind of deserve it. Unfortunately, Naaman is wrong on all 3 points. It's not a transaction. It's a gift. He doesn't want to obey, but God asks you to obey for the simplest things, even if you don't understand why you're doing it. And then finally, there's nothing that you could do that could ever come close to the value of the salvation that can be given to you. Now, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a forked road here, and I'm going to make an analogy that some of you will understand and a lot of you won't. But for the ones who understand, I think you'll get it, and for the ones who don't, I'll explain it to you. Naaman's descent into the river to baptize 7 times, and bear with me now, is kind of like Luke walking into the cave on Dagobah in Star Wars. Some of you know what I'm talking about, some of you don't. But I'm going to explain it in this way. In this fictional story, Luke seeks to become a Jedi warrior in order to defeat the villain Darth Vader. And to become this warrior, he seeks out this little green frog alien named Yoda, who some of you may remember, who likes to speak with the object of his sentence before the subject. So this little alien, Yoda, is actually a great Jedi master. And he's telling Luke what he needs to do in order to become a Jedi. He gives him a simple order, which is, there's this dark cave in this swamp. All you need to do is go enter the cave. That's it. Walk into the cave. And in fact, the order is so simple that Yoda tells Luke, you don't even need to take your weapons with you. Leave your lightsaber and your gun. And of course, it's Yoda, so he phrased it like, your weapons, you'll need them not. Instead, Luke ignores Yoda and he takes his weapons into the cave. But instead of fighting an evil beast, which he was expecting to do, he's confronted with the imagination of himself. He has to struggle against that. And in the end, it was a moral test. He has to struggle against his own dark nature. Of course, you don't need your weapons for that. The key word is moral test. When both Naaman and Luke thought of their challenges as physical tests, in order to go earn the cure for leprosy, you would have to do something great. That makes sense. That's how life works. If you want something that's really good, you have to go out and do something really good in order to earn it. But really, this was a moral test. When you ask somebody to do something like lay down their weapons and go in the cave, lay aside all your medals in the case of Naaman and simply walk in the river and be clean. You're asking somebody to let go of everything that's made them the man that they are or the woman they are up until that point. All of your pretensions and your self-importance. You take off the things that make you who you are and you enter the river, and only then can you become clean and receive salvation. 7 times to go under the water. Like I said, 7 is the perfect number. Naaman doesn't understand any of this, but when his servants appeal to him, they say, how much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? They're saying it's very easy. Just do it. Just take that chance. Take that leap. So Naaman goes down and he dips 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of the little child, and he was clean. By performing this simple action, Naaman had passed his moral test. He had let go of who he was, this great Syrian general who had won so many victories, slain so many people. He had let go of that and humbled himself and gone down in the river, probably wearing just a loincloth, and dipped himself 7 times. And now he was clean. So Naaman returned a humbled man. In verse 15, he returned to the man of God, Elisha, he and all his aides, and he came and stood before him. And he said, "Indeed, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Now, therefore, please take a gift from your servant." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive nothing." And in this way, you could see Elisha is like God. When you read the beginning of this story, Elisha is all-knowing. He knows when the king tore his clothes. He knows exactly what Naaman needs to do to cure his leprosy. He's the one who commands Naaman. And now, when the cure is complete, he won't accept any payment for what he's done. And that makes sense because Elisha is acting as God's representative, his prophet. Naaman offers him this gift, but Elisha says, "As the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive nothing." Because the value of what he has given Naaman cannot be accounted for in worldly gold and silver. It's something beyond that. And Naaman urged him to take it, but Elisha refused. So you read on with this story, and there's an interesting part where Naaman goes back to Syria. Naaman says something that's quite interesting after this. "If not, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord." Think about how amazing that statement is. This is a man who has won great victories for his heathen God. And in just one moment, he has not only acknowledged that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel, but now he will worship him for the rest of his life. That is why he took the earth, because in Naaman's thinking, when he takes Israelite earth, that is the earth that he will kneel down on to pray. He even asked Elisha, "In this thing, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes in the temple of Rimmon to worship there. And he leans on my hand, and I bow down in that temple. May the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing." So this is not a rash decision at all. Naaman is actually thinking about how he is going to go back to his own country as a servant of God instead of a servant of this heathen god, Rimmon. This is a total conversion. That's what God could do for people. But the final question isn't really so much about just Naaman. I'd like to pose a simple question to you, having heard this story. Which character are you? There's 4 choices, and I'll explain them all. Are you the servant girl in your own life? Are you Naaman? Are you Elisha? Or maybe are you even the Israelite king? And the answer for most of us is that, yes, we're all of those people, just at different times in our life. When you look at the servant girl, we should be in the world, but not a part of the world. That's what we're instructed to be. We try to help others and maybe even our enemies. And we should understand that even a small influence can have great effects. Who expected an Israelite servant girl to start a chain of events that would convert the greatest Syrian general? Nobody. But I'll tell you who expected that. God did. And she allowed herself to be part of God's plan. And it led to something that was truly great. Or you could look at Naaman. Maybe at some point, some of us have understood God's help in the wrong way. That we thought we needed to do good deeds in order to earn God's help. And here I'm not just talking about God's salvation. We all kind of understand salvation. We've heard that all before. But when it comes to God's help, there's a temptation to think that sometimes if we haven't done enough good in the past, or maybe we've done something that God didn't like, then we're not worthy of God's help at that particular time. And that's not true. All we need to do is to turn to God and trust him and simply say, I will obey. Please help me according to your will. That's all. Did Naaman earn any of God's help in his life when he was defeating Israel? Absolutely not. Did he earn it while he was worshiping in the temple to the heathen god? Definitely not. In fact, you could almost look at that as negative points. But that stuff doesn't matter to God. He simply wants to help everybody, whoever they are. There's even times that we're like the Israelite king, when we forget God exists at all. If you're confronted with something, a great challenge, a great calamity in your life, the first tendency is to throw up your arms and go, why is this happening to me? What's the deal? How am I going to get out of this? That's only human nature. It's what we do. But eventually, when you come to your senses, you have to remember the question is not how am I going to get out of this? It's how is God going to help me out of this? What does he want me to do? That's the real question that we should be asking. And then finally, there's Elisha, who in this story does no wrong. In fact, he has the power to even cure leprosy in a way. Of course, it's not Elisha who has this power. It's God. But in a way, we can even be like Elisha, because there's an important verse that says, several important verses in the New Testament that tell us that God can dwell in our hearts. When Elisha is acting as the representative of God, he's not a superman. He's simply a person who has allowed God to dwell in him to do great and mighty works. It's God, not him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, we read these verses. Because the God who said, out of darkness light shall shine, is the one who shined in our hearts to illuminate the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. That's what we have to remember. Amen. Our closing hymn is number 470. Sunshine in my soul today.
Before the closing hymn, can our children come up and have a special music?
Yeah.
We've been learning some memory verses using sign language, and so they want to come up and present those songs to the congregation to show you what they're doing.
That can be the closing song.
Okay.
That works.
Okay. Thank you, friends.
I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God. And your law is within my heart, Psalm 40 verse 8. And your law is within my heart, Psalm 40 verse 8. I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God. I delight to do your will, oh my God.
Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor. My blessings to the worthy, 1 Samuel 2 verse 30. Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor. My blessings to the worthy, 1 Samuel 2 verse 30. Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor. My blessings to the worthy, 1 Samuel 2 verse 30. Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor.
God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. Ecclesiastes 2:26. Ecclesiastes 2:26. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. Ecclesiastes 2:26. Ecclesiastes 2:26. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. Ecclesiastes 2:26. Ecclesiastes 2:26. Ecclesiastes 2:26.